A political showdown is brewing in Washington over the special counsel's Russia report. If you thought it was over, just wait. Attorney General William Barr says Robert Mueller found no collusion between President Trump and Russia during the 2016 election.
However, Mueller punted on the obstruction of justice issue, saying that the report does not exonerate the president. Democrats are demanding to see the full report. So for more on this now, we want to bring in CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett. He's following the latest from the White House. And CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is on Capitol Hill. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to start with Major. And let's talk a little bit about, the president saying that this was a full exoneration, even though the report specifically does not say that. But Major, this is as much a legal document or one of legal significance as much as it is of political significance. So let's talk about politically how important this was for the president, for the report, as much as we know about it, because we haven't seen the report, but we've seen certainly the Attorney General's interpretation of the most important components of this report. How important was this politically for the president?
Well, look, I think Ed O'Keefe will agree with me in this. In politics, if you're the subject of a white-hot scandal bit of coverage forever its duration, 1 month, 6 months, a year, 2 years, if throughout you say the same thing, I'm innocent, and then you're proven on the underlying charge to be innocent, the best thing in politics you can say is, I told you so. I was right, my critics were wrong, and I'm going to use everything every critic ever said against me, against them, to punish them and vindicate me. That's the White House posture this morning. There is a great sense, not only that the president, in his fierce advocacy in his own innocence, will now turn that fierce advocacy toward his Democratic critics, even more so than he has throughout this Mueller investigation, by saying people should resign, people should be ashamed, people should issue apologies. Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president, told me out here on the driveway just a few moments ago that it's incumbent upon the Attorney General, William Barr, to go back and investigate and possibly criminally prosecute those who, from the point of view of this White House, set this investigation in motion from what the White House regards and always has regarded as illegitimate political basis. That this was, as the president said yesterday, and I'm not saying that's true, I'm saying the president said it, an illegal takedown that failed. That this was an investigation started from a faulty premise that was designed to hamstring this presidency and undercut this president's legitimacy from day one. That sense of not only vindication, but self-righteousness about false accusations and those who perpetuated them sort of coursed through the White House this morning. They want the president not only to be praised for not doing what he was accused of doing, but they want to go at the accusers and hold them politically accountable relentlessly from now until 2020.
And let's turn to what's happening on the Hill right now. Investigations continue in prosecutor's office and even on Capitol Hill with various committees. How do the Democrats plan to proceed? And are you hearing from any of your sources on the Hill that for some Democrats, impeachment is still on the table?
Well, first to the point Major was making, because I think it's an important one to drive home. Think of the most famous saying or mantra of most of our presidents in the last 40, 50 years. I am not a crook. No new taxes. I did not have sex with that woman. Mission accomplished. If you like your health care, you can keep it. All 5 of those were disproven in one way or another. But there was no collusion with Russia, according to the Mueller report, has been proven to be true. What does that tell us about Donald Trump, the presidency, and people sticking to those kinds of mantras? It's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
As for what's happening up here, it's going to take a little while to sort that out. It's Monday morning, quietest time of the week on Capitol Hill next to Friday afternoons because people are flying in and they're coming back from a week-long recess. So we probably won't get a firm understanding of how Democrats intend to proceed until lunchtime Tuesday at the earliest, because they come back this afternoon, Congress does, for afternoon votes in the House and the Senate. House Democrats will gather tomorrow behind closed doors in the morning, as they usually do every week when they're in session, and begin to have that conversation with each other. As I said earlier today, there's going to be a lot of hand-wringing, head-scratching, and chin-stroking among Democrats trying to determine which of the different investigations that are before them should take precedence, which ones might get a little more attention, and which ones perhaps should either be put off or at least get less attention and concern from Democrats. Probably the Judiciary Committee in the House and their focus on obstruction of justice takes precedence, given that Mueller and the Attorney General both concede that there's inconclusive evidence, at least so far from a legal standpoint, to take that on. From a congressional accountability and political standpoint, that's a huge opening for them to continue that line of inquiry. Also, of course, there are concerns about the president's finances, his businesses, and actions taken by the administration. And actions and policy decisions made by the administration is perfectly within the purview of Congress, no matter who controls the chamber to investigate. So there will be questions about what the EPA has done, what the State Department and Pentagon are up to, whether or not the GSA properly handled leasing the old post office pavilion, which is now the Trump Hotel, to the Trump family, and if the president is improperly drawing profit from that and potentially violating the emoluments clause. All those kinds of things probably can, and from a congressional Article 1 perspective, should continue as part of normal congressional accountability. But there are going to be a lot of questions, I think, for Democrats to the nature of how much time to spend on this, potentially at the risk of upsetting voters who elected a lot more Democrats last fall because they promised to focus on health care, the economy, education, and not necessarily just Donald Trump and questions about Russia.
Well, Major, Ed, brought up the House Judiciary Committee's investigation into obstruction of justice, and we know what AG Barr's report said, but we also know the president said absolute, complete exoneration. That's certainly what he's selling, and so. Isn't there a tremendous risk, if you continue to pursue obstruction of justice, that the president is going to continue to yell witch hunt, witch hunt, witch hunt? Sorry, I can't say that 3 times, obviously, even though it's not a tongue twister. The idea that I'm trying to get across here is, can we anticipate the White House using this Mueller report to, I can see him rolling it up and batting it at each one of these investigations and slamming them down because this Mueller report that took 2 years trumps everything else.
Right. A couple of things to say about that. Number one, the White House now gives so much more credibility and vitality to the Mueller report and the Mueller investigative process than it ever did until about yesterday afternoon, okay? That's point one. And Kellyanne Conway was asked here on the driveway, and so was Sarah Sanders, does the president think he owes Mueller an apology, or his investigators, which he called liars, thugs, Democrats, all sorts of other insults? No, the president doesn't owe them any sort of apology. It's worth noting that the president's attorneys frequently lobbied against that kind of rhetoric, fearing that it could be interpreted as obstructive in kind, that he was using language that by itself was either pressurizing or placing the investigators in a compromised position because the president was essentially yelling at them on Twitter. The president did not heed that advice. Perhaps that's one of the reasons that on this question of obstruction in the president's own public conduct, it's a bit murky. Was he trying? What were his motives? Did he obstruct? In the end, he didn't obstruct because it's very, very difficult, legally speaking. Martha Stewart has some thoughts of this all her own, to be convicted of obstructing when there wasn't an underlying crime. It does happen in rare instances, but generally no, and that's certainly the White House posture. You can't obstruct something that wasn't a crime in the first place, meaning no conspiracy with the Russians. As for the political value of the Mueller report as summarized by the Attorney General, the administration has made it very clear this morning, if it wasn't clear already, this now taints every other investigation suspecting any kind of wrongdoing by Donald Trump. The White House will say, look, the Mueller report turned out to be a huge nothing burger. All these other investigations are all partisan. They're all driven by Democrats who cannot get over, to quote a phrase frequently used here, Trump derangement syndrome. And so the White House will try to apply political toxicity to every inquiry, legitimate or otherwise, about anything the president has done, either officially or before he became president of the United States. And that is the cudgel the White House believes the Mueller report, as summarized by the Attorney General, has uniquely placed in its hands.
And so, Ed, to Major's point then, would it be wise for Democrats, especially those that are running for the presidency in 2020, to begin to focus on issues and policies where they are in direct opposition to the president politically, as opposed to hammering on about this Mueller report? Because although politically 2020 is just around the corner, for a lot of Americans, attention spans are short. By the time we actually get up to the election, people are going to forget. They're going to remember that the president was, quote unquote, exonerated or totally exonerated. And they're going to be looking for Democrats to offer solutions to the problems that affect them on a day-to-day basis, not something that happened, in March of 2019.
Sure. Well, first off, it wouldn't be for us to say whether or not it's wise. We're journalists. We're not analysts or consultants. But the data would show that that is what won Democrats back control of the House last fall, a focus on domestic concerns and not on Donald Trump. A broader argument that they would provide congressional accountability and oversight worked, but that wasn't reserved to just what Mueller was looking into. To the point about they should be campaigning and focusing on other issues, I just pulled up here a list of questions that were asked of Beto O'Rourke at his first stop in Iowa now almost 2 weeks ago. He took 7 questions from voters. They were about health care costs, tariffs, education, the Green New Deal, marijuana legislation, questions about the universal basic income, and women's reproductive rights. Nothing in there about what Mueller was up to and what Congress might be investigating. You talk to every Democratic presidential campaign, they'll tell you that's the kind of question they're getting, that's the focus they've had. Very rarely do they get asked or bring up the Mueller investigation and concerns about Russia. They did over the weekend because they understood that it was immediately top of mind because everyone had been waiting for the release of the report, but they very quickly pivoted back to other issues, and we should suspect that they'll continue to do that.
I think it's so interesting what Ed just said. I read an article on Amy Klobuchar, one of her stops, where she was asked a plethora of questions and was actually expecting questions about the Mueller report, and so she just sort of answered them even though no one was asking her.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
It's the point that Ed is making, that I think, if you talk to everybody who's working on these campaigns, they will tell us that the candidates that they are supporting need to focus on those issues.
Yeah.
Ed and Major, thank you as always. We appreciate it.
You got it.